So, welcome to the Lives of Teachers interviews. I'm talking today to Thomas Farrell. This is a JOLT conference in Tsukuba in Japan. Hello.
Hi.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So you've given, you had a workshop this morning, you've got a plenary tomorrow.
Yep.
And you're here mainly talking about reflective practice.
Yes.
Can you explain very briefly what reflective practice is for those who don't know?
Okay, I'll explain that by starting the same way John Dewey would explain it. He'd tell you what it's not first. Mm-hmm. It's not mulling over, to quote him. Mm-hmm. It's not navel-gazing. It's not just thinking about what you're doing. Mm-hmm. It's actually it's systematic, and it involves collecting data about your teaching. Mm-hmm. And then once you have that information, you use the information to make informed decisions about your practice. So actually it's evidence-based.
How would you distinguish it from action research, say?
Action research is a form of reflective practice. In fact, it comes under reflective practice umbrella, so to speak. And if you go back far enough, you'll find that action research actually was first devised by John Dewey. Mm-hmm. And in fact, anything good in education can be traced back to John Dewey, to be honest. Mm-hmm. And he talked about reflective inquiry. And reflective inquiry has 5 phases. And tomorrow I'll talk about that, but I can talk about it today too, if you like.
Yes, please.
Yeah, the 5 phases are suggestion, intellectualization, guiding idea, reasoning, and then hypothesis testing. And all of these are phases that teachers go through in terms of trying to figure out what's going on in their classroom. As he says, you step back and you change your an emotional reaction into an intellectual reaction, and it's not necessarily problem based. Many people think reflective practice or action research is a problem. Actually, it can be something curious that happens in your class. So action research probably would be limited to the classroom work, although it developed over the years. When it redeveloped, I would say, because actually it can be traced back to Dewey, and it first emerged again in terms of critical action research, in more to do with changes that should be made in society based on an action research project. But it's been taken within language teaching as a kind of a unit by itself, in which teachers go through particular phases when looking at aspects of their classroom. But that's exactly what reflective practice is. And in fact, I remember talking to somebody who does a lot of work in reflective practice, who kind of nodded in recognition in the idea that never thought about it. And I was talking to Graham Crooks in Hawaii, University of Hawaii, who does a lot of work in critical action research, who kind of agrees that it can be traced back to Dewey. So action research is a form of reflective practice, okay, and it's not different from. But one of the things I would probably caution, let's say, graduate students or any teachers is that they would consider action research as a kind of a field or a teacher development in itself. It's good, but it actually comes under reflective practice.
I suppose most graduate students or novice teachers will probably have experienced some form of reflection that's kind of built into teacher education programs these days. It's quite common that we're asked to do some kind of reflection. Do you think people are doing it right?
Okay, well, you've opened a can of worms there, because I don't think it's happening enough in teacher education programs. And in fact, you very rarely get the same teacher education program. Let's take an MA graduate course, graduate program, not course. You very rarely find the same graduate program, even in the same country. Different programs emphasize different aspects of education for second language teachers. And many times the programs are built around a particular professor or what people think teachers need, rather than what actually teachers need. And a lot of the work I've done with novice teachers, they realize that they could have been shortchanged. They haven't been prepared for life in a real classroom. And one of the aspects of the preparation, as you alluded to in your question, is actually, being able to reflect on practice. Not piecemeal, but we have to give the novice teachers the tools to be able to reflect on their practice once they go into real classroom. And one of the aspects of that type of reflection is it's kind of for assessment purposes and more in the top-down mode. And teachers, they say they reflect, but actually they have to reflect. And it's for a grade. It's very difficult to actually grade reflection. But I don't think that's a problem. I think if you have to grade or give an assessment of a reflective practice tool, that's fine, because that's one of the purposes of taking a program. You have to give grades and whatnot. Well, what the result of that is, a novice teacher can learn how to use that reflective mode as a tool to survive in the classroom. But I still think that we don't have enough reflective practice assignments and whatnot in teacher education courses. And I've recently edited a book on international perspectives on language teacher education for Palgrave, and the book is just finished, and it's going to be moved towards the publishers soon. But I did a state of the art, so-called, and I said the art is in a state. And one of the reasons is that we're not preparing, in my opinion, the profession is not preparing the teachers for real classrooms. And every classroom is different. Every environment, context is different. So some people say, well, how do you prepare them for all different contexts? Well, you give them the tools to be able to reflect on where they are and how to adjust to what they have to do. So I've proposed actually a specific course that should be in all teacher education programs, regardless of the context, and that is a course called Teaching in the First Year, which would involve the tools of reflective practice and case studies of teachers who have gone through the first year. So that should be a probationary type of assignment given to all graduates of all programs. And I've written extensively about that, actually.
That leads me off in a couple of different directions. Let me address one of them first. So I think, as you mentioned, most people who have some kind of TESOL or TEFL or EFL or ESL or whatever you want to call it training, it is a lot more piecemeal.
Yes,
I think if you have a mainstream, if we want to call it mainstream education background, that will be more structured and more, codified maybe. And also there's a lot of reflective practice in disciplines like social work and nursing and so on. And again, the training in those disciplines would probably be a lot more standardized across the board.
I would imagine,
So what...
Standardized and required.
Yes.
Yeah.
Whereas it's not.
No, it's not, because in TESOL graduate programs, I'm assuming you finished asking the question, you have so much diversity. For example, if you're teaching a course in psycholinguistics or sociolinguistics, how would you build in reflective mode? But by the way, I teach sociolinguistics in a graduate course, and I teach it through reflective practice. And I built in a reflective assignment. And the assignment is, for example, what aspects of sociolinguistics would you use in your first years of teaching? How does it impact your teaching? And they write that assignment. That actually is a reflective device. So what you're doing is you're getting the students to reflect for action. It may not happen, but you're getting them to think about it. And they're using writing as a reflective tool. So, it's an assignment and I grade it, but they're benefiting from it. And I also make them present it in the last day of class. So if I teach, this aspect of the course, for example, identity, and then you can say student identity, well, my students are going to take on a new identity, learning a language, and as a teacher, what is my identity as a teacher, which is you're focusing on the self as teacher as such.
Well, that brings on to the second point about you're talking about first year teachers, especially. So my feeling is perhaps that first year teachers or novice teachers, early career teachers, will need a lot more of the, if you like, technical aspects of teaching. What happens if I do this?
Yes.
How do I get this to happen?
Yes.
Whereas teachers with more experience, they don't need to stop reflecting, but they maybe reflect in a different way.
Yeah.
like Donald's shown, right? The kind of reflection in action, reflection on action, and then the knowledge that you gain with experience. How do you think we should evolve our reflective practice?
Yes, interesting question. Well, the needs are different. Novice teacher needs and experienced teacher needs are different. I think experienced teachers need a lot more. You have to give them a lot more latitude when reflecting. I've just finished working with a group of experienced teachers, and I'll talk about that tomorrow as well. And what I did was I facilitated their reflections. In other words, I didn't tell them what to do. And I set it up by saying, I've used the following reflective tools successfully with other groups of teachers. For example, writing a journal, group discussions, and classroom observations. And what I find with experienced teachers, the most challenging of all three is classroom observations. They don't necessarily they're not comfortable allowing me into their classroom, and rightly so as well. But that you can trace that back to what they experienced in their teacher education program, in which all observations were judgmental. And novice teachers would be used to that, whereas experienced teachers wouldn't be used to having somebody in their room, especially after all the years of gap. So one of the biggest differences would be you would have to really set a parameter whereby classroom observations, or peer or otherwise, would be for non-judgmental purposes. And that's the beauty of reflective practice, because you can use particular category systems that are not less inferential as such. I use one called SCORE, Seating Chart Observation Record, and what you do is you plot the communication in class. So somebody observing would actually not give an opinion. They would. You could do, microethnography, you could do whatever you like. It's like, what is? So for an experienced teacher, it's very important that reflection produces awareness of what is for that teacher, not what the teacher thinks it is. Because experienced teachers, what they think they do and what they actually do is not necessarily the same. And I found that out quite a lot. And one of the reasons, and it's not that there's anything wrong or they're doing anything wrong. One of the reasons is that they become comfortable with routine, and they have kind of, I use your word, codified their routine in a specific way that probably makes them comfortable about their own practice. But actually, what they actually do, they might be surprised. Again, non-judgmental. It's what is. And when I work with teachers, or experienced teachers, these category instruments are very, very good in terms of SCORE. They show you this is what the communication looks like in the classroom. But you can even make it more simple. How many questions do you ask? What type of questions? What's your wait time after a question? Peers can observe each other doing that. You can see where it's not how many should you ask, how many do you ask? And then you give it back to the experienced teacher, is this what you want? Is this what you want to practice in your classroom? So the end result is the teacher decides what to do, not an observer or a facilitator or whatnot. So in novice teachers, the reflection for novice teachers, you'd probably be guiding a little bit more, and you'd probably be using more examples of what other teachers did. And for experienced teachers, what you're doing is you're probably reigniting their energy, or a lot of teachers get lost over the years, and they're afraid to look at their practice because they're afraid they might be doing something wrong, and they're probably not. They're probably doing it better than anybody else. But what the beauty of reflective practice for experienced teachers is that it gives them renewed confidence, because whereas before they weren't sure what they're doing or why they're doing it, after a period of reflection on their practice, which is systematic, as I told you earlier, then now they know what they're doing and why they're doing it, and more importantly, they can explain it to themselves first and then to their administrators and their students, as in reflective learning we're doing this, of which I believe you are quite good at.
Thank you. I would hope so.
So that was a rather long answer, but
no. That was a thorough answer. Yeah. No, I think to kind of basically what we say what we say we do and what we actually do as teachers is often different. And if you really want to reflect on your practice well, there's kind of a hard case somewhere inside that you need to crack open and find out what you truly believe. And when you can find that kind of incongruency, maybe, which may or may not exist, you can move forward and see what you want to do.
You can change things, but you can't change anything if you don't know what the thing is in the first place.
No.
But it's quite understandable. Teachers, if you remember what I was talking about this morning, self-reflection is not self-laceration. And we have a tendency to do that. Teachers have a tendency to do that. And they think they're doing things wrong, but they're doing a lot of things right. And so every now and then, it should be mandatory in a way, but of course it depends on where you work. But it's called a sabbatical in university, in which you step back and you look at in that context, you look at your research and you look at your practice and you think, well, where am I going from here? It's a time to take stock. We have it in the university system, but ESL teachers, we don't have it. And in fact, what you have is the opposite. You load up the hours. Well, wait a minute, you're only teaching 30 hours. We can add what's another 2 hours? And this is where, I worry about the teaching as calling effort. Because, whose needs are you taking care of really there? And so if ESL is to be a profession, we need to build in a period of reflection, especially mid-career teachers.
Absolutely.
For mid-career teachers.
You've alluded to the book that you've got coming out, your edited work. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that? Because I'm interested to read it when it arrives.
Well, that book it's in the international series that Sue Garden and Keith Richards, not from the Rolling Stones, but the other Keith Richards.
Yes.
They're the series editors. And I was lucky enough to be asked would I put together an international perspective on second language teacher education. And now we have 11 chapters from various countries. Language teacher education model in Turkey from Simon Phipps, which is very, very interesting because they meshed Delta and an MA program together to get the best of both worlds. In other words, to give the teachers that practical education before they go out into the real classroom. That's not in a theoretical MA program. That's one chapter. And then there's chapters on how teachers used technology in the classroom and how they reflected on that. And in fact, one interesting thing, one of the patterns that went through each chapter is how teacher educators innovated and used reflection, both for themselves and their student teachers, throughout their programs. But they're doing it in an isolated manner in terms of it's not built into an overall structure of second language teacher education, as I said earlier. But what I found is that the innovations that each of these teachers were using, Jack Richards included, he has a chapter in materials, is very, very innovative as such, but it's also very reflective. And so teacher educators in different parts of the world are using reflective practice in their own way, but it's like they're subverting the system. Because we seem still not to want to talk about it as every advertisement on any MA program is, yes, we encourage reflective practice, but actually the teacher educators teaching the courses don't. They don't actually practice what they preach. It's on the brochures because it's something that's popular, and then a lot of people have written it off as a bandwagon. It's not a bandwagon. It's one of the most important reinventions. Remember Dewey. Within teacher education, I think, in the last 20 years. And because education loves fads, but this is not a fad. This is actually a very important aspect of what we do.
It's more than just a phrase on a hat, right?
It's more than a phrase on a hat, but then again, I'm trying to sell a few hats. Yes.
No, I quite agree. I very much agree.
Yeah.
So.
And the other book that I actually have coming out next month is Promoting Teacher Reflection in Second Language Education by Routledge.
Okay.
Shameless advertising.
You've got 2 out.
No, this one, the one I just talked about, the edited book, that won't be out for 6 months.
Okay.
The one that's coming out next month is an exciting one because I've developed a framework for reflecting on practice
Yes.
that I believe doesn't exist anywhere else. I think it's the first overall framework for reflecting on
Are
practice.
you going to give us a teaser, or?
The teaser is that it has 5 stages, if I can remember them all now. First is philosophy, reflecting on your philosophy of practice, and it includes contemplative reflections, which is meditation. So and as I was writing it and reading it, I felt so serene doing it. I thought, whoa, this stuff is really interesting. It takes us beyond the self-reflection, and it brings us within the self, you know. And there's breathing techniques and all that. I'm not. It's not a real how-to in that sense, but there are certain reflections within that chapter that I think are very interesting. But it comes from contemplative practice. And then we move into reflective practice on the philosophy of teaching, and you got a bit of that today on teacher frames. And then we move on. The next stage of the model is beliefs, and then theory, and then practice, and then beyond practice. So beyond practice is very important as well. It's the critical reflective aspect that's, I think, weak in our profession. You know, whose interests are being served by the book you use, the school you teach in, what comes out of your mouth, which I think is very important, but neglected because of the money aspect of what we do within ESL. It's such a huge industry.
Well, we do always have a lot of other kind of factors that we need to play around with, but then let's not get too far into that today.
No, we won't.
But thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome.
And yes, thank you.